Tonight's going to be more of the format that we did in person, where I just printed out the text for tonight and we're just going to walk through it. So it'll be in John chapter 10. And as we do that, I thought we'd start by just reading through it first, and then we'll break it down from there. So John chapter 10, I am the good shepherd, and I am the door. Truly, truly, I say to you, he who does not enter the sheepfold by the door, but climbs in by another way, that man is a thief and a robber. But he who enters by the door is the shepherd of the sheep. To him the gatekeeper opens. The sheep hear his voice, and he calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all his own, he goes before them, and the sheep follow him, for they know his voice. A stranger they will not follow, but they will flee from him, for they do not know the voice of strangers. This figure of speech Jesus used with them, but they did not understand what he was saying to them. So Jesus again said to them, Truly, truly, I say to you, I am the door of the sheep. All who came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved and will go in and out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. He who is a hired hand and not a shepherd, who does not own the sheep, sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and flees, and the wolf snatches them and scatters them. He flees because he is a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my own, and my own know me. Just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. And I have other sheep that are not of this fold. I must bring them also, and they will listen to my voice. So there will be one flock, one shepherd. For this reason the Father loves me, because I lay down my life that I may take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down on my own accord. I have authority to lay it down, and I have authority to take it up again. This charge I have received from my Father. There was again a division among the Jews because of these words. Many of them said, He is a demon and is insane. Why listen to him? Others said, These are not the words of one who is oppressed by a demon. Can a demon open the eyes of the blind? And so that last sentence gives us the context for what's just happened. He's actually just healed a blind man in chapter 9, and chapter 10 likely happens immediately after that. So there's not a whole lot of changing or anything there. So they go into this, again, explanation of Jesus trying to explain who he is. Again, that picture of God, black and white, or in Jesus. And then each of these I am statements adding a little bit more color, a little bit more detail, so that we can understand what exactly is going on. So he starts in verse 1, Truly, truly, I say to you, he who does not enter the sheepfold by the door, but climbs in by another way, that man is a thief and a robber. So a sheepfold in this context is not just a fenced-in area for the sheep to stay. It's actually would be built by bricks or stone or boulders, something much more substantial than just a fence. And it would have a narrow opening in it so that the sheep could get in and out, and then it could be watched carefully overnight so that the sheep would be much safer than if they were out in open pasture. So in verse 1 where it says sheepfold, it's definitely not a fence. It's definitely something more substantial than that. And then he talks about climbs in by another way. He who does not enter the sheepfold by the door, but climbs in another way. That's somebody with bad intentions. Because if you're going to come into a sheepfold, you would just normally come in through the door. But somebody who climbs in by another way, you'd only avoid the main entrance if you had bad motives. And sure enough, that's how he finishes the verse. That man is a thief and a robber. He's up to no good. And verse 2, but he who enters by the door is the shepherd of the sheep. The term shepherd, we see shepherds all throughout the Bible, and it's really a popular term, not just for literal sheep, but kings would use the term of that they were a shepherd over people. Priests would use the term shepherd, that they were a shepherd over a particular group. So it's a very popular Bible word. In fact, as we get started, Dr. Pentecost, who I'll talk about a lot in his book, The Words and Works of Jesus Christ. Um, Highly recommend it. He just walks through all the Gospels and explains the Gospels. And if there's two sections of a Gospel, part of Matthew and part of John, that go together, he takes them together and explains them both together and in context of each other. So that's very helpful. But there's Old Testament references to this idea of shepherd that the prophets have identified that these people likely would have known. Certainly the Jewish scholars would have known this. The different prophets had warned about bad shepherding before. In Jeremiah chapter 50, verse 6, it says, "My people have been lost sheep. Their shepherds have led them astray and caused them to roam on the mountains." So the leaders have not been good leaders for Israel. And of course, we know that from Israel's history to be true. Later on, or earlier, Jeremiah said in chapter 23, "Woe to the shepherds who are destroying and scattering the sheep of my pasture, declares the Lord. Therefore, this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says to the shepherds who tend my people. Because you have scattered my flock and driven them away and have not bestowed care on them, I will bestow punishment on you for the evil you have done." And then Ezekiel, another prophet, this is a little bit longer, but again, this idea of shepherds. "The word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, prophesy against the shepherds of Israel. Prophesy and say to them, this is what the sovereign Lord says. Woe to the shepherds of Israel who only take care of themselves. Should not shepherds take care of the flock? You eat the curds, clothe yourselves with the wool, and slaughter the choice animals, but you do not take care of the flock. You have not strengthened the weak or healed the sick or bound up the injured. You have not brought back the strays or searched for the lost. You have ruled them harshly and brutally, so they became food for all the wild animals. My sheep wandered over all the mountains and on every high hill. They were scattered over the whole earth, and no one searched or looked for them. Therefore, you shepherds, hear the word of the Lord. As surely as I live, declares the sovereign Lord, because my flock lacks a shepherd, and so has been plundered and has become food for all the wild animals, and because my shepherds did not search for my flock, but cared for themselves rather than for my flock, therefore, O shepherds, hear the word of the Lord. This is what the sovereign Lord says. I am against the shepherds and will hold them accountable for my flock. I will remove them from tending the flock so that the shepherds can no longer feed themselves. I will rescue my flock from their mouths, and it will no longer be food for them." But then later on, so that's not real good news for the shepherds, but later on, the same prophets, Jeremiah and Ezekiel, also provide comfort for those who are referred to as sheep, the scattered flock. And for instance, Jeremiah 23:4 says, "I will place shepherds over them who will tend them, and they will no longer be afraid or terrified, nor will any be missing, declares the Lord." So we have this whole idea of shepherding from the Old Testament, but really bad shepherds in the process. So as Jesus is coming into this, saying he is the good shepherd, it's a really big contrast between what the people had experienced, had their ancestors had historically experienced, and what he was now offering. So it's not just taking a reference to agriculture of the day and raising sheep. It was actually following through on this image and this motif that was all the way back to the prophets and even before that, because shepherds were a big part of society all through Bible times. Even Abraham was a shepherd. So we see that, and of course, David was a shepherd. So that's all this shepherd idea. In verse 2, he who enters by the door is the shepherd of the sheep. And what Jesus is about to say is, I'm the one that enters by the door. I'm the one that actually does this the right way. And so that's what we'll see. Verse 3, to him the gatekeeper opens. That's John the Baptist, the gatekeeper in terms of Jesus. He's the one that announced that Jesus was coming. And he opens that door because Jesus is doing it the right way. Just like we said, unlike all these other shepherds, Jesus is doing it the right way. And there's a whole lot of Bible references for this. We won't read them all. I'll just give you a quick summary of what the right way is for them to recognize that Jesus really is the good shepherd. The first one is Micah 5:2. Micah 5:2 says that the Messiah will be born in Bethlehem. And Jesus, of course, was born in Bethlehem. Daniel 9:24 and 27, I will read. just because it's both confusing and incredibly interesting. Let's turn to it here. It's Daniel 9. Uh, 24 through 27. 70 weeks are decreed about your people and your holy city to finish the transgression, to put an end to sin, and to atone for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal both vision and prophet, and to anoint a most holy place. Know therefore and understand that from the going out of the word to restore and build Jerusalem to the coming of an anointed one, a prince, there shall be 7 weeks. Then for 62 weeks it shall be built again with squares and moat, but in a troubled time. And after the 62 weeks, an anointed one shall be cut off and shall have nothing. And the people of the prince who is to come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. Its end shall come with a flood, and to the end there shall be a war. Desolations are decreed. And what Daniel's going into here is giving a measurement of time, not literal 7-day weeks, but weeks of years, that if you take it from when Daniel was written and track it all the way down to when Jesus was born, it is remarkably accurate at predicting the timing of when Jesus would come. So not only is he going to be born in Bethlehem, he's coming at a specific time, and that's when he came. And then Isaiah 7:14 describes the birth circumstances. Isaiah 61, 1 and 2 describes the ministry of the one who is to come. Isaiah 35, verses 5 and 6 talks about the miracles that this Messiah will do. And Malachi 3 verse 1 talks about the forerunner, or John the Baptist, is going to come and talk about him. And so all of these things have lined up perfectly, just as the prophet said, just as God told people it would happen. And so to him, the gatekeeper opens, back to verse 3 of John 10. The reason the gatekeeper opens is because all of these things are right. Everything God said was going to happen had happened. And so Jesus is now able to enter the fold the correct way, not by climbing over, not by having any bad motive, but by doing it truly as God had said it would happen from the very beginning. And then continuing verse 3, the sheep hear his voice, and he calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. Likely there would have been several flocks in one sheepfold, simply because of all the work involved in building them. They would be shared by various shepherds and various flocks during the night before they were let out to pasture later during the day. And so when he says he calls his own sheep, he really is establishing separation there. The sheep are going to respond to the voice of their shepherd. Sheep a lot of times get the reputation of being dumb, but they're not dumb. Actually, they're very loyal and incredibly dependent. And so when they learn the voice of their shepherd, they're going to do what their shepherd tells them, and they're going to trust their shepherd, and they're going to listen to their shepherd. So when Jesus calls his own, they come out. They come out because that's what sheep do. Verse 4, when he has brought out all his own, he goes before them, and the sheep follow him, for they know his voice. Again, that idea of loyalty, of trust. They're trusting the shepherd to lead them to a place where they can eat and graze and spend the day. Verse 5, a stranger they will not follow, but they will flee from him, for they do not know the voice of strangers. You take a farmer who has sheep that listen to him, and you bring me into the picture, and I try to call them, they're not going to listen to me. They're going to listen to the voice they know, the voice they trust. So a stranger they will not follow, but they will flee from him. They don't know the voice of strangers. This figure of speech Jesus used with them, but they did not understand what he was saying to them. So Jesus is trying to communicate something to them, but the people he's talking to aren't quite getting it yet. Just a little pause as we move from the idea of a fold to the idea of the pasture. Within the fold that Jesus is talking about is Israel. Israel is the sheepfold. And so we have Jews but we also have people who believe in Jesus or will believe in Jesus. So when Jesus calls their name, they will come follow him. Not everyone will, but those who trust him as their savior, as their shepherd, will. And so within this fold, we said there's different flocks, but that's Israel, that's Jews, that's believers, and Jesus is leading those believers. So he goes back at it again, trying to explain it a little bit better. And so Jesus again said to them, verse 7, "Truly, truly, I say to you, I am the door of the sheep. I am the door of the sheep. All who come before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not listen to them." These ones who didn't go by the right entrance, the one who didn't have the access from the gatekeeper to get in, Jesus does. So I am the door. I'm the one that gets the sheep to go where they need to go. He says the sheep did not listen to those thieves and robbers, but verse 9, I am the door. He says it again. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved and will go in and out and find pasture. So he's just taking that idea of that door and the way sheep behave and the relationship between sheep and shepherd and saying, that's me. That's who I am for these people, just as that's who a shepherd is for his sheep. Then verse 10, the thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. So again, those bad motives. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a few verses. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy, but I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. Now, that's not two different lives. Some Bibles say life and life abundantly. It's all the same life, but life abundantly is just describing how good that life is, because the previous life would have been death, whether that's from natural causes or it's from these thieves who come to steal, kill, and destroy. Then Jesus says, that's not what I'm offering. That's not what I'm giving to you. I offer life, and life to the fullest, life abundantly. So I am the door, I am the door. And then verse 11, I am the good shepherd. I am the good shepherd. As opposed to these ones who come and do all these things they shouldn't do, I'm the good shepherd. And of course, that immediately draws us to Psalm 23, where we see what a good shepherd does, and we get to be drawn into that and reminded of that. But something else I want to read to you from Dr. Pentecost's book, as he explains Good Shepherd. I just thought he did it much better than I could, so let's just read this together. Christ now proceeded to show that he was the good shepherd. According to Psalm 23, the role of the shepherd was to make the sheep lie down in green pastures, to lead them beside quiet waters, to restore their souls, and to guide them in paths of righteousness. All this the good shepherd did. Christ, as the good shepherd, was himself the way to life, and those who entered through him were saved. They entered into freedom and found that which satisfied their souls. Established Judaism could not provide its followers with what was good, but Christ as the good shepherd came that they may have life and have it to the full. The Pharisees offered their followers a hope of finding life through a life of obedience to their traditions. The Sadducees offered a hope of life through oft-repeated rituals and sacrifices. Christ offered abundant life to those who would trust him as the good shepherd. Christ could offer his sheep life because the good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. Thus, Christ was presenting himself as a substitutionary sacrifice through which those who trusted him would enter into eternal life. So we just talked about Jesus being the good shepherd and what that means. And of course, when you hear about the good shepherd, that brings up ideas of Psalm 23. That's really popular for funerals, but it's actually a great reminder for us who are living and still get to enjoy what Jesus does for us as a good shepherd. But he says, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for his sheep. And the reason he does that is because he actually cares about the sheep. He's actually invested in what's good for them and what's not good for them. Verse 12 says, he who is a hired hand and not a shepherd, who does not own the sheep, sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and flees, and the wolf snatches them and scatters them. That's because to a hired hand, it's just a job. If the sheep do okay today, that's great. But if a wolf comes, I'm out of there because this is just a job, and I don't get paid enough for that. Um, but Jesus says he's the good shepherd, and he lays his life down for the sheep because he actually cares. It also harkens back, speaking of Psalm 23, harkens back to David, who was a shepherd. And remember when he came up against Goliath, he said, I fought the lion and the bear, and I'm going to take down this uncircumcised Philistine with the help of God. He's had a training that's taught him the importance of the sheep, therefore that lifts up his value as a shepherd and his effectiveness as a shepherd. And then in the same way, many years later, Jesus would give up his life for the sheep. And he intercedes for us now, is what the Bible says. He intercedes on our behalf before the Father. So he is still looking out for the best interest of the sheep. As he's talking about this, he would have had the common people around him as he's going through this, but he also would have had religious leaders, at least in earshot, even if they weren't right in the crowd. They would have been curious as to what Jesus was saying. And that's who he's talking about when he says these people who don't really care about the flock, who just are in it for the job, who are just in it as long as the days are going well. He's talking about the religious leaders. They're all for the pomp of being a religious leader, depending on the circumstance. And so that's who he's talking about. And so verse 13, he flees because he is a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. He's talking about the religious leaders. They don't really care for you. But I'm here. I'm the good shepherd. I do care for you. I will lay my life down for the sheep. Trying to communicate to these people who he is and what he wants to do for them. And so verse 14, again, he reiterates, I am the good shepherd. I know my own, and my own know me. Just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay my life down for the sheep. We see this idea of this intimacy and this reciprocal relationship. Same thing we saw a few verses earlier where we talked about sheep not being dumb. They blindly follow anyone. They're incredibly loyal and dependent, and so they rely on their shepherd. They know their shepherd, and because of that close relationship, their shepherd knows them. There's just a deep level of intimacy here. And just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father. So just as close as a shepherd is to his sheep, a good shepherd, one that really takes care of them, that's the way Jesus and the Father are. It's deeply, deeply connected. And he says, and I laid it down my life for the sheep, which, of course, is predicting his death on the cross, Jesus' death on the cross. Verse 16, and I have other sheep that are not of this fold. This is really interesting because as we go through the Gospels, there's a moment in each of the Gospels where suddenly we switch from Jesus just going after the Jews to now Jesus going after the Jews and the Gentiles. Now, if it's not in the Gospels, and of course in Acts, when we see, go and reach the whole world. And then in Ephesians, that we spent so much time in Ephesians in chapter 2, he says, you're no longer two different races. You're now one. You're united in Jesus because of Jesus. And so that all goes into the same idea of having one flock, one shepherd. That is the church. You're no longer just Jews. You're no longer just Gentiles. You're no longer just Israel. You're no longer outsiders or insiders. You're now one flock with one shepherd. And Jesus says, I am the shepherd. And so while church isn't expressly mentioned, this is John telling us in the gospel that about the church and the creation of it that we'll see later on in Acts. And so then in verse 15, where it says, I lay down my life for the sheep, not only is he predicting his death on the cross, he's also saying he knows what this level of relationship requires. Because as you get a closer and closer relationship, there's more and more and more trust. And Jesus is saying, I fulfill that. You have every reason to have that level of trust in me, because that's the relationship I want. I desire it. I care about my sheep this much. And so, one flock, one shepherd. For this reason, the Father loves me, because I lay down my life that I may take it up again. So, take it up again. He's just predicted his death. Now he's predicting his resurrection, which has other implications for it in terms of Old Testament prophecy that we talked about at the very beginning of chapter 10. But so now not only has Messiah come at the right time and done the right things, he's predicting that he's actually going to die and rise again. So this is all part of the larger narrative of what God's doing, even within this little section about Jesus being the good shepherd. But the Father loves me because I lay down my life that I may take it up again. We see an interesting mix here that we don't really experience in human-to-human relationships. We would like to, especially in a parent-child relationship, where a child is loved because they obey, and yet they obey because they're loved. And there's this incredible interplay of loving and obeying, of love and obedience. And it so often is tainted or twisted in our world today, so that we can't truly grasp how beautiful that is, how great that is. But in an unflawed environment, with unflawed people, God and Jesus, the Father and the Son, God the Father, God the Son, that can happen. And that's what he's saying. There's this love and obedience relationship that just merges so well together. In fact, Jesus goes on to say in verse 18, no one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord, voluntarily. I'm willing to do this. I have authority to lay it down, and I have authority to take it up again. This charge I have received from my Father. So I'm doing it completely willingly, even though it's the Father's will that I do it. I don't feel forced. Complete willingness, because that relationship exists just as the relationship between the sheep and the shepherd exists. So why would he be willing to lay down his life? Well, it's because of how much he cares for his Father, who wants it to happen, but also for the sheep who he will be saving. Just an incredible amount of love and care and provision here. And then verse 19, there was again a division among the Jews because of these words. Many of them said, he has a demon and is insane. Why listen to him? Others said, these are not the words of one who is oppressed by a demon. Can a demon open the eyes of the blind? And that takes us again back to chapter 9, where he had just healed a blind man and given him vision. But now we can look at that. We said that at the very beginning, but now we can look at that. He just healed the eyes of this blind man. And in chapter 9, the blind man was healed, and he was no longer able to hang out in the temple with the sick and the injured and all the people waiting for help or waiting for a handout, waiting for a miracle. He was now healed. He was now part of Jesus' flock. So we see somebody go from one flock to the other, just as Jesus is inviting all of these people to do. He's saying, look, you're in this flock of Jewish people. You're in this flock of Israel. Come be a part of my flock. Let me be your shepherd. Let me take care of you. But of course, people didn't understand, or they didn't want to understand. And so they said, he has a demon and is insane. Why listen to him? And that really rings true today, as believers, are being questioned more and more about, what they believe, why they stand for this, why they don't support this, all sorts of things going on there. And not intentionally because of the hearings going on now, but Judge Antonin Scalia said this at one point in his life. God assumed from the beginning that the wise of the world would view Christians as fools. He has not been disappointed. Have the courage to have your wisdom regarded as stupidity. Be fools for Christ. Have the courage to suffer the contempt of a sophisticated world. And I thought, well, that fits so much of what's happening in the world, but also fits this. Jesus is teaching this, and as great as it sounds, especially if you're a Jesus follower and you're reading this or you're studying this, it's just really encouraging. Like, this is who Jesus is for me. And yet, to the outsider, it sounds like foolishness. And so have the courage to be a fool. Have the courage to have your wisdom regarded as stupidity. Be a fool for Christ. Those are good marching orders. Have the courage to suffer the contempt of a sophisticated world. As we think about this, of course, it gives us yet another layer of who Jesus is. Of course, we said he is life. He's the bread of life. We said he is the light of the world. Now we're getting to the point of love. That's going to take us into the next section of John. And it hasn't been introduced officially yet, but Jesus is showing love by describing himself as this good shepherd. And if we think about the idea of a shepherd even deeper than what's just said in the text, one of the thoughts I had this morning as I was going over this was our tendency to focus on minutia instead of on the magnificent. We think about what ruins our day. It's usually something pretty small in the grand scheme of things. We think about what takes up most of our time, usually something rather small in the grand scheme of things. What pulls our focus, usually something pretty small in the grand scheme of things, where really in the grand scheme of things, what matters is Jesus, and what matters is God, and what matters is people coming to know Jesus either for the first time or to know him better. And so often it could even just be our routine where we get started and the day has this happened, and this happened, and this happened, and this happened. And one of those that this happens might be Bible study. It might be a devotional time, but it's all just something to check off the list. And we miss the magnificence of what God is doing in the world and who God is. And so as I think about sheep, the sheep rely on the shepherd for everything. The minutia of where they're going to eat that day, where they'll get water that day, where they're going to be able to lie down that day and find pasture. That's all the job of the shepherd. And Psalm 23 confirms that for us. And so I just wanted to read Psalm 23, just to remind us of that. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Just to think about that, the Lord is my shepherd. Take everything we've said from John 10 and apply it to that. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. All these little things I worry about, he's going to take care of. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He restores my soul. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He's giving me rest. He's giving me what I need. Still waters, of course, it's a lot easier to drink from still water than a raging or rushing area of water. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. If we let all the minutia up to him, we can focus on the magnificent one, Jesus, our shepherd. And that's what it says. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. That's taking us to the magnificent. And then even when things don't go so well, we still have the shepherd. Even if it's something not going well because of our own poor choices, we still have the shepherd with us. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. This is the blending of these two shepherd passages just go so well together. And so often we kind of separate it. Like I said, Psalm 23 is left for funerals. Um, but this is Jesus talking to living people saying, I'm the good shepherd. I'm here for you. I love you. I care about you. And I want to be this for you. And so Psalm 23 can be our everyday experience with Jesus as the good shepherd. And so if we had to take one kind of plain language statement from tonight's section, I would simply say, let the shepherd do what the shepherd wants to do in your life. Let the shepherd do what the shepherd does. Let the shepherd do what the shepherd does. Because to a sheep, minutia, they don't worry about it. And to a sheep, the magnificent thing is their shepherd. They listen for his voice. They follow his voice. They don't follow other voices. And when they're following that voice, the voice of their shepherd, they trust him completely. And that's an incredible reality for sheep to have a shepherd like that. But it's an even better reality for us to have a good shepherd like that too. So let the shepherd do what the shepherd does. I mentioned in my message in my email a couple resources, and that simply as I go through preparing a Bible study, I know there's always the chance that we come to church or we hear somebody on the radio or watch a video online or have a Bible study like this, and we think, well, every time I read the Bible, I never get that much out of it. And that can be kind of discouraging. And so I just wanted to include those resources to kind of give you a next step. If you're like, I'm reading the Bible, I'm not getting out of it what I think I should be getting out of it, or I'm not sure I'm seeing the right thing. Just a couple simple resources can really help focus and define your Bible study time. And so one would be a study Bible. That's one where it has notes, footnotes, or different passage explanations on the bottom. There's some really good ones out there. Chuck Swindoll has a great one that I use a lot. Tony Evans has a study Bible. David Jeremiah has a study Bible. John MacArthur has a study Bible. There's a whole lot of other ones. The ESV study Bible, we use ESV on Sunday mornings. The ESV study Bible is put together by several folks, but that's very good. So that would be resource number one. That would be helpful. Resource number two is a commentary. Now, I have commentaries that are one book that includes the whole Bible. I have commentaries where it's a separate book for each book of the Bible. Some of them, they even split the books into multiple volumes just to fit everything in that they want to teach you. But a good commentary is the one I included, called the Bible Knowledge Commentary. It's 2 volumes, Old Testament, New Testament, but it explains the passage without going into so much detail that it bogs you down. So that would be a good one to check out. And the other one is a Bible dictionary. I believe I included the Nelson Illustrated Bible Dictionary. And that one would be great because when we talk about a sheepfold tonight, you could go there and it would explain what a sheepfold is and probably show you a picture of it as well. So it helps give that information. They usually have timelines to show how the different parts of the Bible fit together, so you can understand the history a little bit better, so that as you're reading through it, you just get a few more details that help you understand what the actual text is saying. Not that God can't speak through his word just on its own, but for those who want to dive a little deeper and do actual Bible study, those are really good places to start. And resources that I recommend. In fact, I use the study Bible and the commentary, both the Swindoll study Bible and the Bible Knowledge Commentary every week as I get started, and then I go into the deeper resources and stuff that I use. But those are both really good ones just to help you kind of take it the next step in your Bible study. So Jesus is the door and Jesus is the good